What's a dead giveaway you grew up poor? Story 1. Food hoarding. All the people I know who grew up poor have too much food expiring in their pantries, myself included. Bonus poor points if you store refrigerated food in yogurt containers and not Tupperware. My mother did and still does this. Don't know much about her past before she was like 7, other than bad things, but the aunt who took her in was normal and didn't run out of food. So many times in my childhood, I've seen her prioritize hoarding food we didn't need over taking me to a dentist or doctor. Dropped my insurance and claimed it was us not affording it, but like a day later, went to the store and spent like $350 for food that I can guarantee you went into the trash in the end. Couldn't get me a proper coat because of it, was found screaming under the table in pain, but she would do nothing much at all. I feel called out right now. Is this really a poor thing? I never associated the two. Story 2. My mother-in-law was a bank account manager, so my girlfriend didn't struggle at all while growing up. And sometimes she asks me stuff I don't know how to answer. She told me about birthday parties she had in nice places and asked me if I had the same. My parties were my mom baking a cake and cooking something for the family. She told me her bedroom was such a color and asked about mine. I lived in a one-bedroom house where all of us slept. I slept in a crib until I was 4 or 5 because my parents couldn't afford a bed for me. She told me her mother didn't cook until retirement, and they went to a nice restaurant every Sunday. We only got McDonald's once a month. She asked me if I watched a few TV shows, but I didn't know them because I didn't have cable until my mid-teenage years. She started working because she wanted to buy stuff and go to parties. When I got my first paycheck, I bought a good button-up shirt because I used to wear my father's shirts, and still wore his old shoes for quite a few years. I wore my sister's shoes my entire adolescent life, and I got red flagged when I was in my early 20s by asking for a size 10 boot at a shoe store. The lady told me they only went up to a size 9, so I thought, okay, that's that. She looked at my socked feet and said, "Are you sure you're a 10?" and measured my feet. I'm a size 8. My entire life up until that point, I was wearing my shoes 2 sizes too big because I thought they were supposed to have that much room at the toe. No wonder I was tripping and falling all the time. This one strikes me. I'm reminded of my birthdays every year consisting of just going to Grandma for dinner, which we did every week. Grandma and Grandpa could afford food much better than we could. I did have a room, even my own, once I was a teenager. That was nice. We often couldn't afford heating in the winter though, so the whole family would pile on an air mattress in the living room to keep warm through the night. We had food, kinda. I can't account for my early childhood as well, but I remember knowing my parents ate whenever my sisters and I didn't, and they ate nothing else but our leftovers for dinner, so I ate less. Our situation improved, but my appetite got used to being small, so I ended up underweight. We had cable, though it was frequently out. It was the first to go when my parents had to pick which bills to pay. We were over a decade behind most families technology-wise. I had access to my older sister's laptop when I was a preteen. She worked 2 jobs in high school and bought the laptop and shared. She sold it for college funds. I bought my first laptop as a freshman in college. The phone I have now is my first to not be a decade old when I got it. I started my first job at 13, making $6 an hour in cash under the table when $7.25 was the minimum wage. My parents asked me to hide my money, so they had to ask me to pay a bill, rather than be tempted to just take it. They wanted me to be able to say no. I didn't say no. I hoarded the money at first until my mom told me I should spend some, lest it all go to bills. I treated myself to a full lunch at school every day, sometimes splurging to buy a 70-cent ice cream cup I would top with a 30-cent cookie and mash together. This was genuinely considered a luxury at my school. I hope they're in a far better situation now. Story 3. Never eating out and saving all leftovers. Always have peanut butter and bread and pasta just in case. Constantly being scared of losing your money or being overly frugal about everything. Excessive couponing, being scared to invest because you could lose money. Not having traveled anywhere. I know some people who love to brag about how poor they were growing up. They do, and always have done, the exact opposite of everything in this comment. They only allow the most pretentious brands of everyday food in their kitchen, scorn the idea of basic meals like PB&J or soy sauce and rice, and won't hesitate to throw out a perfectly good meal if it isn't to their taste, or if a little bit at the bottom of the pan is burnt. They will always blow extra money on a mundane item with a bit of novelty. are currently buying 2 properties in popular tourist spots at the same time to build Airbnbs on, and genuinely believe that sharing drinks from restaurants on their vacations to Disneyland and Universal Studios and getting free meals from their memberships at Six Flags are true testaments to how impoverished they were. As someone who actually grew up poor, has 95% of all the habits and paranoias mentioned in this thread, and always gets told how privileged I was by them, they know almost nothing about how I grew up. They just love to assume that they have had it worse than anyone else. Reading this just made me think about them and chuckle a bit. Yeah, I really don't understand how people think of poverty as a fashion statement. Story 4. I thought everyone ate breakfast cereal with a fork so they could pass the bowl of milk to the next person. I was wrong. I had a friend who grew up really poor and told me about a wish sandwich. That's where you would get 2 slices of bread, ketchup, mustard, mayonnaise, if times were good, and salt and pepper. And while you eat it, just wish there was meat in it. He said some days you just got 1 slice of bread. He was basically an orphan, and a very kind and loving woman took care of him. She had next to nothing, but she gave it to the children she took care of. He had some amazing stories about living in her house growing up. One of my favorite anecdotes was that he had one of those old console televisions that was basically a piece of furniture. One day it broke. They were able to get another small TV somehow, but they kept the old TV to use as a TV stand because why get rid of a perfectly good piece of furniture? He claims this was relatively commonplace in his old neighborhood. Someone somewhere said they spent the night at a friend's house and ate cereal with the family the next morning. The person recalled that the cereal was oddly sweeter than it should have been. After everyone finished their cereal, they dumped the cereal milk back in the jug. Their guest wasn't aware that the family recycled cereal milk and drank the entire family's backwash after they finished their own cereal. I might not remember the source, but holy hell, I'll never forget the horror story. I've never regretted reading something more than this. Story 5. Still packing food, bread, deli meat, chips for road trips. My husband and I can afford to eat out every meal, but when we go on a road trip, I still pack cooler food for lunch instead of eating out. By the way, packing hack for homemade cookies, make them small enough to fit in a cleaned out Pringles can. They stay fresh and don't break. My mom raised me experience rich, where she budgeted tightly to be able to give me normal for our area, California, experiences. We did pretty much only road trips and stayed within a 10 to 12 hour drive, and we packed food for the hotel, not just the car ride. The first time I did this was with my BF and asked what hotel foods he wanted. He looked at me like I was crazy. I asked if his family didn't do that when they went to Disney, and he told me his family flew to Disney. That's when I realized some of the methods my mom took were to save money, and not the normal part of the experience. LOL. My mom grew up in abject poverty, and no matter what we earned, she would always bring out the 7-hour lukewarm car trunk boiled egg and vinegared cucumbers at the rent stop along with 15-year-old disposable utensils that had been washed like 100 times each. I'm nostalgic for these lukewarm things, and the plastic Ziploc bags that were probably bought when I was born and then washed at every use for decades. My partner is quite the opposite, where he'll go to a McDonald's at every rest stop, order the full meal, and throw out the bags. It's normal now, but I did have to go through the hoarder, maybe we'll use that McDonald's paper bag for something someday, until I realized I wouldn't. Not the most hygienic, but definitely the most fun. Story 6. An elementary school teacher told each of us to bring in a bar of soap for some carving art project. Me: Mom, I need a bar of soap for school tomorrow. Mom: for what? Me: art project in Miss Davis's class. Mom: does she not know how expensive a bar of soap is? No. Take the 0. I remember my dad losing his ever-loving mind about having to pay $15 for a scientific calculator for my high school algebra class in my freshman year, 1989. It was a TI-35X. I used it all the way through high school, including physics where everyone else had the fancy programmable TI-85 graphing calculators, and college. I actually still have it. It still works, and I use it on the occasion. I'd say that was $15 very well spent. When I had to have one about the same time period, my mom literally cried. It required us to go without food for 3 days to buy it. I kept telling her I would just tell them I couldn't afford it, but she wouldn't let me. I still feel sick when I think about it still. When my kids were in high school, the school provided them. but my son wanted his own, so we bought it for him. My daughter too. My son is now a chemical engineer/chemist. By the way, he has since bought 2 or 3 each, one better than his last. Each of the old ones I take to school. The calc teacher and I graduated at the same time. I ask him to pass the older ones on to the kids who may like their own, but not to say where they have come from. Do you know how lucky those kids are? We have a huge population of poor people in our high school. Those kids whose parents can't afford to buy their kid one. The teacher told me one of them packed it with their stuff to go to college. They are going to major in chemistry too. My 9th grade ceramics class required that we have a lock for our locker used to store in-progress art projects. I couldn't afford a lock. The day I was supposed to fire my final project, it was completely smashed. I still don't know what happened, but I'm guessing someone put their backpack on it or something. I showed my teacher and he failed me because it was my fault I didn't follow directions and had a lock. I was too embarrassed to say I couldn't afford one. Some of these stories are hitting me right in the feels. Story 7. Saving a milk jug to mix powdered milk in. My brother wouldn't eat syrup unless it was Mrs. Buttersworth, so Mom would refill a glass of Buttersworth with generic syrup and fooled him for about 20 years. Yeah, I would love to pull things like this on my kid. Since she was 2, I can walk into the room with something visually identical to what she's expecting, lay it before her, and if a flavor molecule is awry, she's ready to slap the plates out of every hand in the house, lest we all poison ourselves. She's exactly like her parents. We have tastes that run the gamut. Gourmands from garbage to gourmet, but you cannot trick us. We know what the hell we're eating. I might like a certain crummy store brand of knockoff Cheetos a little more than the real thing, but I'm not confused about which is which. And Mom, I know you bought already cooked shrimp and sauteed it before slathering it in pesto, which is fine, but you don't have to claim it's from the farmer's market, because that's kind of a weird thing to do. Plus, you left the bag at the top of the trash bin. When my girlfriend and I moved in together, she started cooking. She wanted to make beef and noodles, and her mom had a really great recipe, so she was set on making it. After about a few different attempts, she looks at me and says, "The beef here just doesn't taste the same. Next time I'm home, I'll grab the beef my mom uses at her house." She ends up going to visit her mom and brings back a mason jar of beef. She whips up the beef and noodles, and with such excitement hands me a bowl and says, "I'm so excited to actually have the beef and noodles with the beef from home." I go to take a bite and it tastes really gamey. I look at her and say, "This is venison," to which she is absolutely in denial. She calls her mom and says, "Is this beef venison?" I hear her mom laughing on the phone and saying, "Yes, it sure is." My girlfriend is a very picky eater and her parents knew she would never eat venison, so they told her it was beef, and for 24 years she believed it. She said it all makes sense now because no matter where she went, the beef just never tasted the same as it did at home. If you can't tell the difference, does it even matter? Story 8. Never showing teeth when smiling. I grew up so dirt poor and never received dental care until I was well into my 20s. I'm now 40, and only recently, after many dental procedures, have I begun to feel comfortable showing my teeth. I had the same issues with my teeth. Having bad teeth isn't just a health issue, it's also a social issue. People always assumed I did meth because my teeth were bad. Anytime I got pulled over, the police would search and search and search because they just knew I had to have meth somewhere. It kept me from getting jobs and people treated me like crap in general. I finally got dental insurance and was so excited to get my teeth fixed. But no, since my teeth were bad already, they were considered a pre-existing condition, so the dental insurance was useless. I finally got all of them pulled and got dentures. It was the best thing I'd ever done for myself. I immediately noticed how people took me seriously and didn't treat me like a junkie. It's also made me a lot more social in general because I'm not embarrassed to smile. I've conditioned myself to not move my mouth or lips while speaking so teeth don't show. I'm like a damn ventriloquist without a dummy. It would be impressive if it wasn't so sad. That was honestly the best part of masking up throughout the pandemic. I have been able to smile and speak freely for the first time in like 30 years. I'm about to inherit a tidy sum of money, and the first thing I'm spending it on is dental procedures. It's still crazy how dental isn't covered in most health insurance plans. Story 9. Collecting pop and soda cans from random places, even pulling them out of the trash for 10 cents. Man, My biggest score ever was cleaning out a rich dude's garage on an island near my house. He would have epic parties and just stick the cans in the garage. It was filled floor to ceiling, and he gave them to me and my sister just over $600 worth in 1984 money, so we lived pretty well that summer. LOL, I went on a field trip in middle school. It was a wilderness kind of thing where everyone was to pack a lunch. When everyone was done, they were throwing away soda cans. I was sitting close enough to the trash can to see it taking place, so I was telling my classmates to put them next to the trash and I'd make sure they were recycled. The truth of the matter was that my entrepreneurial side wouldn't have let all that money go to waste. A teacher provided a trash bag and I toted about $5 worth of aluminum home in the back of the bus. I didn't feel like the poor kid. I thought it was just making some easy money. I was most definitely the poor kid. My cousin and I were kids in a small southern town and would walk behind the IGA grocery store, get the bottles they had stored out there in a buggy, and turn around and sell them back to them. We were bad, I know, but this meant several trips to Bill's dollar store. Grandma would say, "Where did y'all get all this stuff?" "Collecting bottles, Grandma." Collecting bottles was probably a lot of kids' first jobs. Story 10. Genuinely thanking someone for any type of food that you are given. My friend's parents pointed it out to me when we got older. They always made sure my brother and I were well fed and looked after by them. Our downstairs neighbor is pretty well off, compared to us, and often goes to parties with too much food or orders a special food delivery service every week. We don't lack food, but whenever she offers us leftovers because she doesn't want the food to go to waste, we're always so happy and super grateful to take it. We're so lucky to have her as a neighbor. I drilled into my kids, always grateful, never grovel. They are adults now and express sincere gratitude when given anything, even a meal from a parent. This is not the result of childhood poverty, but the sign of someone who knows how to feel and express genuine gratitude. I will never apologize for modeling that in my children. Yes, grovel is the exact right word. I had a friend growing up who was poor, and that was the way he acted. Poor guy. Nothing he ever said was groveling by the words used. On paper, he was just exceedingly polite, but his tone was always that of one begging for table scraps. Even things like a glass of water were religious ceremonies of requesting permission, affirming how grateful he was, getting the tiniest bit of water, then thanking again, and repeating for the second glass. It was tap water, man. Just go up to the sink and drink your fill. Food was an order of magnitude worse. We would have it all ready cooked and laid out for everyone to eat, and then he would ask, "May I please have some of it?" I feel really bad for the guy looking back, and still do now as an adult, but he never learned any basic self-respect for himself and never learned to take care of himself. He's still the same way. This is way more wholesome than I expected. Story 11. This is an odd one. I realized the only people who will offer to help you with moving or even moving furniture around your house are people who grew up poor. Everyone else seems to think it's normal to hire movers. This is a weirdly nostalgic one for me. I grew up upper middle class for the first half of my childhood, which dropped to middle/lower middle class after my parents divorced. We moved almost yearly for my dad's job prior to that, and would always hire movers. Afterward, we had to pack our own stuff every time we moved, and frankly, it sucked. I'm really thinking about putting aside a couple of grand to hire movers the next and hopefully last time I move, because I just hate it so much. My SO thinks the concept of hiring movers is weird, so it will take some convincing. I move furniture for a living, and the people who have us pack too are so detached from reality. We did have some poor people too who paid cash and change, but at least they tipped and were grateful. Rich people didn't. Story 12. Saving my butter bowls for Tupperware use later. Our affluent neighbors who bring us Indian food when they have extra bring it in old sour cream containers. I thought that was genius, so I've started to run the empties through the dishwasher. Now I send leftovers in that stuff instead of my Rubbermaid that is never returned. I laughed so hard right now. My youngest aunt and I were raised the same way as my grandmother. I'm 45 now, she is 50, and we will give leftover food after visits to each other in old ice cream containers, and then return the same containers with CV comments of, "Here's your Tupperware back, oops, I almost forgot." Some are even marked in faded black marker by my grandmother who passed away 5 years ago. The rest of the family thinks we are barking mad. After a Christmas party, I gave a lot away to my family to take home and moaned after when they failed to return my ice cream containers. These days, I accept I probably won't see them again when I have to. This one hit close to home. Story 13. Bruh, my mom would take used bars of soap when they got too small and put a bunch of them in a leg of an old pair of pantyhose and then tie it off and cut the rest of the pantyhose off. Then you'd have a big ball of old soaps bundled and fused together, and that was what you used for the next however long. Yeah, it's thrifty or whatever, but let's be real. That's poverty, LOL. I had a relative who did this. As a snack, half of the first cookie, gum, split a stick, the soap thing, AC off, all of it. Then they retired early and bought a nice house on a bunch of land paid for. They lived in poverty, so I guess they wouldn't have to later on, and unfortunately died at a relatively young age. I wish they had just enjoyed their youth a little more instead of waiting and saving to not be able to use it for more than a year or two. Soap sock! I'm so glad I kept scrolling and reading other comments. In jail, I learned about the poop sock. Keep the pieces of soap, put them in a sock and tie it off. Then after you do your do, smack it against your hand a few times and it's almost like spraying poopery. Helped make that 5-day stint a little better. Not necessarily related to growing up poor, but you don't have much in jail. And damn, they are resourceful there. It was a humbling experience for sure. It's smart, although I'm not sure if that's the cleanest way to clean yourself. Story 14. I've noticed I try to hang on to every little thing in case I can reuse or repurpose it. Gift bags, empty containers, old makeup. Family went through some really hard times, and I guess my brain tries to prepare in case it happens again. I have to go through my things and force myself to throw the junk away sometimes so I don't become a crazy hoarder. I'm straightening myself out now with this. My house is almost 100 years old. When I moved in, most of the plugs were 2-prong. I updated them to 3-prong because that just makes sense. Today I found a box in the basement that had all the old 2-prong plugs in it that I apparently saved for some insane reason. I threw them away because when the frick will I ever need a box full of 2-prong plugs again? Yep, this is a big one for me. There's a difference between wanting to be conscious of how much you waste and having anxiety because it feels like there's a very real chance you'll be screwed over if you don't have the foresight to keep it. Similar habits of reusing or repurposing, but a really different sort of feeling behind it, in my experience. Once you've experienced not having food or soap with no means to get it, it's crazy hard to shake the feeling of needing that backup. Story 15. Finding out that other people's families didn't make weekly family trips to the church thrift shop on Thursdays and the library on Tuesdays. I know we were not the only ones, and we thought everyone did these weekly family activities. The library is one of the absolute best resources in your community. We are barely surviving this summer. I just finished school and will start teaching in August. Won't start getting paid until September though. And trying to prepare for my first year classroom on top of 2 kids' birthdays coming up and our already paycheck to paycheck living situation has made this summer even worse than our previous summers. Our local library has saved me from feeling like this has been the worst summer ever for my kids. They have a summer reading program and the kids get prizes for every 105 minutes they read. The first prize was tickets to the city pool, and they do craft times on Tuesdays, story time on Wednesdays, and different events on Fridays. Last Friday was to meet a search and rescue dog. My kids love everything about it and have so much fun. On top of that, we're reading more than we ever have, and they love it. They also have a kid's computer with games on it, and after my kids pick out a book, they get to play on the computer. It's been wonderful, and it makes all of us feel like we're actually doing something this summer. I never knew about the program, but apparently it's been happening for many years. The library has been amazing, and I will continue to use it even when we are hopefully in a better situation money-wise. Some of my best early summer memories are the summer reading program. It's a capital way to get kids to develop a love for reading while keeping them learning while school's out. I don't know if this is widespread, but my local library also offers free tutoring from volunteers in various subjects. Definitely worth checking out if your kids are at that age. Your library, depending on how big it is, may also loan out various tools and electronics, or even give away seeds to plant. Some are starting to do that, which is really cool. People really don't understand how valuable libraries can be. Story 16. If someone knows the pain of boiling your water on a stove to take a shower for months on end, did this for 3 years, was homeless and squatting in an abandoned house. Cold water worked after I flushed the stale stuff out, but the hot water heater was trashed. The problem was bathing in winter, upper Midwest, and the thermostat was broken. Wouldn't even get above 45 degrees inside. A big canning pot from the kitchen full of boiling water hauled up to the bathtub, mixed with cold from the tap in a dishpan, wash, dump the water, and mix to rinse. Then dry off as fast as possible and wrap up in blankets until the chill goes away. I did this too. We had electric heat upstairs for the bedrooms, but the downstairs was propane, and we didn't buy any for 4 years while I was in college. We had 3 huge stock pots for boiling water for baths. The challenge was to try to get your whole body washed, hair clean and conditioned, legs and pits shaved before the water got cold. It was hard in the Midwest. Here's to better days, fellow shiverer. I've had to do this when my water heater broke. Not a good experience in the freezing cold. Story 17. Feeling guilt or shame before asking your parents for something that costs money. You just get so used to it as a child, which leads to holes in the shoes or rips in a t-shirt. It would have to be them saying something about it and then telling you that they will buy you these things in their next paycheck. I do have to note, I'm so grateful for the childhood I had and the sacrifices my parents made to make ends meet. When I was in the 7th grade, I didn't have a coat. I felt so guilty, I never told my parents. I kept telling them I left it at school. Then getting me a coat meant less money for food or bills. I had a teacher who noticed one morning, and when I told her the truth, she wrote me a note so I could sit in her classroom every morning. Kind of reminds me of when I was young and didn't want my parents to spend money on toys for Christmas. Instead, I asked Santa for expensive things so I could then sell them later for some cash. The most expensive thing I could think of at that age was a pool table. It was then that my parents decided to break the news about Santa. It's the thought that counts, right? Story 18. Parents went without eating, so we could. I do that now with my kids, even though we don't need to. If I'm out of town working, my wife always tries to give me food or money to bring to work, and I say no. I don't need anything. Leave it for the boys so that they can eat, or save it so that you can get y'all anything y'all need. During 2008, we didn't lose our house, but we were damn near close. My mom made hamburger helper, would get it at 25 cents per box on good deal days, and Dad didn't eat. He left it for my brother and I. He would eat a piece of bread with butter and just smile and make sure that we were okay. We talked about it years later, and he discussed how he always wanted to make sure we had enough, and we did. My mom was and still is a warrior in the kitchen and can whip up something out of nothing. She grew up extremely poor. I love them both so much and still live with them as my dad's health has taken a hit due to a work accident. I am so grateful for them. I grew up middle class, maybe lower than that, definitely stretched thin and definitely felt poor at times, but the love in the house made up for it all. My dad got a job across the state, and we spent everything we had to move. He was promised in advance on his first paycheck, but once we got there, they said they couldn't do it. The 6 of us lived on $26 for a month, and we didn't have a refrigerator. It wasn't until I was much older that I found out my parents were telling us they ate first, when really they were smearing bits of food on plates to make it look like they ate, and then splitting our leftovers for an entire month. Really breaks my heart now. I really need some tissues right now. Story 19. Personally, I grew up middle class, but one thing I've noticed about several friends and roommates I've had that grew up poor is that they eat cheap/basic white bread and butter, or margarine with almost every meal. It doesn't matter what it is, they have a few slices of buttered bread with it. Maybe it's just a regional thing here, I don't know. I assume it's because it's a cheap way to fill up, to make a meal more filling for cheap, or adding extra carbs to a meal that wouldn't necessarily call for it. Chili cut 50-50 with rice, potatoes, and hamburger helper, barley and goulash, and stroganoff. Still have white bread and margarine on the side, of course. And this is how I kept 4 boys fed and happy. Cornbread and beans or chili, added rice to a lot of stuff, and always had a pan in the fridge that they could snack on, and baked, boiled, or mashed potatoes with just about everything. Pancakes make some great PB&Js too. 2 of my kids had to be gluten-free, so the rest of us ate cheap white loaf, and they got homemade bread. Also, I got so much canned pumpkin puree from the food pantry, so I used that to make the cornbread for a little extra fiber and nutrition. It's a pretty smart way of getting nutrition though. Story 20. Every time I acquire something higher end, like fine perfume or good quality wrapping paper, I don't want to use it. It's like I can't justify it, or I don't deserve it, or I'm saving it for when I'm crowned queen or something. Weird. It doesn't even have to be a gift. Sometimes it's stuff I bought myself. I'm like this too. But when it was almost empty, I would stop using it so that I'd always still have some when I needed it. I'd end up with a bottle of expensive perfume or shampoo with barely anything left inside, just sitting there collecting dust. sometimes for years. It was a weird sense of security, I guess, knowing it was always there if I wanted it without having to spend money. I feel this. I've gotten way too many things as gifts I never use because they're just way too expensive to justify. Thanks for watching until the end. If you have a similar story that you would like to share with us, please leave it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave us a like and subscribe. For more videos like this one right now, please stop by our channel. Thanks again, and see you next time.